So, okay, we can go. So very briefly, some contextual background stuff on the deployment of Nutri Score and why we've put it in place in France. Why we've got this idea of developing a logo, meaning that we can have a transparent system on the nutritional value of food. Now, for the major challenges of food, where nutrition is involved, now we've got data which means that we can really see the extent to which food can be a determinant factor in chronic illnesses, and there's a human, social, economic cost which is very high, whether it's risk of cancer, of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, mineralization of bones, and other pathologies where for a number of years there's been the identification of the protective or risk-creating factor of foodstuffs. So there's a cost in terms of health, which is quite considerable, mobilizing, of course, all the players involved in the political front as well, because through food, you can have prevention actions for these chronic illnesses. Of course, they're not solely linked to nutrition. There are other factors, genetic, biological, metabolical factors, which intervene in the risks of these illnesses. But among the various factors, there are genetic factors which are there where it's not possible to act. The content of what you've got on your plate, of course, is something that you can have an impact on. These are all factors where it is possible to act with an impact which is potentially very high. Two examples, just to remind you that nutritional factors are involved, for instance, in determinism of cancers. And a lot of work has been carried out by the World Cancer Research Fund and several thousands of scientists working on this. A third of most frequent cancers could be avoided with nutritional prevention in various countries. You can see a third in developing countries. The role of nutrition is even stronger. For instance, of the upper airways and digestive system, pharynx, stomach, esophagus, and so on, and for as well the colon and the cervix. Now, if you cut 10 grams of salt to 5 grams of salt in consumers, this would cut the cardiovascular cerebral accidents by 23% and 17% for cardiovascular disease. So we have got big challenges, and that's why all countries have set up nutritional facts. The PNNS in France, which concerns information, education, communication, the offer, the food offer, and a number of things there. And one of the factors is, there are a certain number of recommendations which are very often given to the population. One is very famous, that is the fact that for your health, avoid eating too much fat, too much sugar, too much salt. Now, everybody knows this slogan now, but when you've got a supermarket shelf in front of you, how can you look at this recommendation in practical terms when you've got all sorts of products and a very broad range of a very broad selection? Look at these cheese pizzas. Which is the best one in terms of nutritional value? When you look at the packaging like that, of course, it's very difficult to say. After all, it's the same product. It's going to have the same nutritional makeup. Well, if you're a bit more curious, you might try and look at the labels on the back. But the nutritional labels very often are totally illegible, and you can't understand them. And you've got these columns of figures and these tables which are pretty esoteric. Say what is really, which is the best, nutritionally speaking. It's extremely complicated. However, if you put a summary system like this, going from A to E, green to red, where you can characterize, you can summarize what's contained on the nutritional label, you can see there you've got very easy information to read. You can see there's one which is B, which is better classified than C, and those that are D. So with a simple system like this, on the front of the box, in just a second, you've got the possibility of really recognizing the nutritional value of these foodstuffs. And it's very intuitive, very easy to understand. So it's an extremely straightforward idea. It's informing the customer when they're purchasing, when they're making their purchase, on the overall nutritional quality of the food, which means they can compare foods, and they can go for better nutritional value foods. Now, the second element which was thought about with the setting up of this logo was the ability of encouraging industry to improve the nutritional quality of the food they produce, with an opportunity with the system to value their efforts in terms of reforming or innovating, because when they reformulate, they are capable of improving their positioning on the score, the Nutri Score. It's one measure which can be part of public health. It doesn't summarize the whole issue of nutrition. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it's an opportunity to have an action which can contribute to improving the quality of the offering. So it's a system which can be useful for consumers, which is based on the calculation of an overall nutritional score. And we'll come back to this. We're going to summarize the information. It's set up by British colleagues and institutionalized by the Food Standards Agency in the UK. And it was adapted by the HCSP. And it's a universal system which can be applied for all foodstuffs on the same basis with the same criteria. So you can recognize very easily the nutritional quality of or between different families. You can compare breakfast cereals with dairy products, with sodas, with sausages, with whatever, biscuits. So you can compare the nutritional quality of food belonging to the same family. So in cereals, in breakfast cereals, you can compare muesli as opposed to chocolate stuff or whatever. You can have dry biscuits with chocolate biscuits, for instance. And another thing is it shows you, as I showed you for the pizza, for the same foodstuff, you can actually compare between brands. There's high variability, even for the same product, between different brands. And you can compare different brands of chocolate cereal, different mueslis, or different pizzas. So it's a system which is extremely easy to apply, and very practical. Now, how do you calculate it? Well, you take the product of what exists already, the nutritional label that's obligatory at the moment, the list of ingredients. So within the label, you've got the calories, simple sugars, saturated fatty acids, sodium, so salt. And so you use that. You take the percentage of fruit and legume, fruits, vegetables, leguminous and nuts, fibers, proteins. And because depending on the level of nutriment content, you can give a score from 0 to 10. If there's no simple sugars, you put 0. If there's a lot, you put 10. And between the two, of course, there is a grid, and you can matrix it out, if you like. You can give points from 0 to 10. Same thing for the positive elements, fruit, vegetables, fibers, proteins. So you can go from 0 to 15. 0 to 5, sorry. So simple sugars, energy, saturated fatty acids, salt, you can go from 0, if there's none of these foodstuffs there, to 40 points. If it's extremely rich in fatty acids, sugar, salt, whatever. Now, for the positive points, it's the same thing. Thanks to 0 to 5 for each of the 3 components, it represents, for the positive points, an interval that goes from 0, if there's none of these products in the ingredients, up to 15 points. So these grids have been set, endorsed by public health authorities, and then you get the final score between the negative points and the positive points. And you get a final score which goes from the best in terms of quality of -15 right up to +40 for the worst nutritional quality. And with thresholds that were set by the public health authorities in France, which would give a color or a letter, it's the same thing, goes from green to red, from A to E, and it's very straightforward. So with this, you can, if you look at the color or the letter, you can give consumer information based on extremely scientific elements. Now, what's important to remember is that this classification, this nutritional profile, this score, it just didn't come out, it wasn't just plucked out of thin air. It was endorsed by a number of scientists, a large number of scientists, looking at the driving force of the Nutri Score, the way of calculating the nutritional profile and classifying the foodstuffs, and then the graphic form, which as well was from a number of scientific elements, just to show you that when you recommend this nutritional system, there are scientific bases which are extremely serious. Now, what was done was to see whether the nutritional profile, this score, the classification, corresponds to what people are expecting in terms of nutritional expectations. Now, it's true that it's been shown that this score classifies foodstuffs in relationship to their the recommendations for public health, BNNS. Fruits and vegetables will give a better score than sugar products, or snacking products, which will have a worse score. And what was endorsed as well was that applying this to food in the market today means that you can distinguish the nutritional value of different elements. If you look, for instance, at breakfast cereals, you can see it goes from A right through to E, with a whole range. I mean, consumers really, when they're looking at the breakfast cereal shelf, they can look at this and they can make a decision. They can see the differences in nutritional quality. If you look for drinks, same thing. Extremely simply, and it's in line with recommendations for public health. You get sodas towards the E, and then gradually you get mineral water towards the A, with fruit juices in the middle and fruit-flavored drinks towards the lower end of the scale. So it's very consistent with the recommendations and the public health message. Just show you an example which shows you how you can discover, thanks to Nutri Score, the extraordinary variability that you can get within a single product. Now, if you look at the French market, 35 cereals, all called crunchy muesli with chocolate nuggets. So you could expect them to have the same nutritional value. Now, when you give them the Nutri Score, you can see that some are in A, others in B, others in C, others in D, others in E. So without this information, it's, you know, without this information, you can't take this on board when you're buying. So the Nutri Score corresponds to a classification, and it corresponds to what was expected. Now, we've gone even further in endorsing this by looking at things individually, with food surveys carried out. How do subjects behave when you apply this to individual consumption for each of the corresponding score? Now, you can see that those who've got an individual score which is lower, so those who've got are well positioned, so it's the opposite way around, if you like. These are people who eat more fish, more fruit and vegetables, less fatty snacking stuff. They've got they eat more fibers, more vitamin C, more beta carotene, zinc, so on. So better balanced diet, and they observe recommendations better. When you look at their blood samples, they've got the best status in terms of vitamin, notably vitamin C and beta carotenes. Now, when you look at another cohort, over time. Subjects who consume the better qualified, you get an association with the development of pathologies. And thanks to to Nutrinet and Suvimax, so following them between 5 and 13 years, you can see that eating better qualified foods, we can modelize because the Nutri Score didn't exist when this was carried out, but we can modelize this, we can model this, and you can see the risk of developing cancer, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, or obesity is considerably reduced in people who are eating these foods with an identified or identifiable Nutri Score, which is more favorable or nutritional value. Now, another element is that we've validated the graph in relation to other types of logos which have been proposed by various operators. Here are some examples of studies that have been published. This is more than 20,000 subjects where there was a test of different types of logos. The one that was proposed by mass retailers, Nutri Score, is the British style, and then you've got when you ask the question concerning the subject, concerning the questions, you can see that the preferred format is the Nutri Score, twice as high as that as the traffic lights of the multicolor of NutriColors, or was proposed by the industrialists. It's the easiest to identify, the Nutri Score, easiest to understand, and the quickest to understand. And it concerns all categories of population. Whatever the level of weight, people who are overweight, they preferred Nutri Score, and the buy-in shows nutritional skills of the population, whatever their nutritional competency. Now, we looked in terms of objective understanding, which logo made it possible to give a better classification of elements. We worked on more than 13,000 subjects, testing 4 types of logo, and testing this with products with different types of logo, and we asked people to classify them in terms of nutritional value, from the best to the less good, and so on and so forth. So we tested different families of foods, and we looked at the positive response rate and the correct rate. Now, the logo, which is 5 C's, 5 colors, this is the initial nutritional one, is the most performant. Then you've got the traffic lights, multiple traffic lights, a GDA and a tick. And whatever the category, socio-demographic category, even for those who are who have got the least nutritional knowledge, it's always Nutri Score that came out best for classifying the nutritional value of the foods. So we tried to go even further in scientific studies. We worked on this with several teams, looking at the impact on the nutritional value. When subjects have got this information, do they buy products which are better quality nutritionally? So we did a randomized test in a supermarket, an experimental supermarket online. There's already a number in commerce. All the big mass retailers have got this. We reconstituted one, and we proposed to more than 11,000 subjects, 12,000 people almost, to do their shopping online virtually. And 20% of subjects were in an online supermarket where there was one of the logos. Look at Nutri Score, traffic light, the green tick for the Dutch system, the Dutch tick, or the GDA. So shopping online, and then looking at buying intentions, because they weren't really buying, and look what really happened. Well, the 5-color Nutri Score is the one that increased significantly the nutritional quality overall of the basket. The lower the column, the lower the quality. And then you've got traffic lights, ticks, the green tick, you've got the GDA, and then a no label. So there's a big effect of the Nutri Score. So what's interesting is it didn't have an impact on the price and the number of products added to the basket, whatever the logo. Overall, Nutri Score didn't mean that people had to pay more for the better nutritional value. So when we looked at this specifically, you can see that the logo with 5 colors was the only logo which made it possible to reduce the intake of fat, salt, and salt in the basket. It was not quite as much with the sugar, but it was a very short period of time. And the effect that was observed on the improvement of the basket was for the whole of the population, notably populations of lower socioeconomic level with less information on nutritional value, and people with a higher body mass index, a high BMI. So whatever the level of knowledge, it was the Nutri Score logo, the 5-level one, that came out best. This was completed by a big study that we carried out with the Ministry of Health in 60 supermarkets, this time in under real conditions, where for 10 weeks consumers were exposed to one or other of the logos, or an absence of logos, with products that were labeled in 3 areas of the supermarket with proposals for each of these. And in total, there again, just like for the virtual supermarket, but for this time in real purchasing conditions, Nutri Score was the logo that gave the best nutritional value. It's the one that had the biggest impact on the nutritional value of the basket. Just under 5% of improvement as opposed to 4% for Nutri-Color and a bit more than 3% for Sense. Now, what's interesting in this is that there again, Nutri Score had the biggest impact for the less well-off consumers, and so it's a way of fighting against health inequality, social inequality. Now, the final thing I wanted to show you was in an experimental shop, colleagues gave participants in real-life conditions, gave food that was labeled with each of the 5 systems, the Nutri Score, the Australian system that we call Nutrimark, the Nutri-Colors or multiple traffic lights, Sense, or no logo, Nutri-Repair or no logo. Now, we're in more controlled conditions, the methodology is more rigorous, and there's an effect of just more than 9% for Nutri Score. For the general population, it improved the nutritional value by more than 9%, which is considerable. And we've heard of the Australian system and then the British system of multiple traffic lights, and then the others were less impacting on the purchasing, and the Nutri Score remains the best for participants, for populations who are the least well-off, in lower socioeconomic situation and lower knowledge of nutrition. So there you can see Nutri Score is a system which is based on a very solid scientific foundation. Europe has endorsed Nutri Score when France proposed a notification for all European countries, because there are more than 30 publications, scientific publications, that show the interest in scientific terms and in terms of public health. That's why it's supported by knowledgeable societies and colleges of experts. It was validated by the health authorities, ANSES, by the HSCP and Santé Publique France, National Public Health watchdogs, by consumers associations that have carried out tests as well in their reviews, and they've got applications as well on smartphone apps as well. Society is asking for this. Citizens are asking for this. There was a petition launched a while back, more than 250,000 signatures for it to be set in place. The WHO gives Nutri Score and the adoption by France of this score as being a model for Europe. It was supported by the ministers concerned. There was on the 31st of October an interministerial decree signed with the Ministry of Agriculture, Health and Economy and Finance, and it was supported by a certain number of people in business, in the industry. There were 6 big companies that had committed to using the Nutri Score: Danone, Fleury Michon, and 3 mass retailers. Intermarché, Auchan, Leclerc, McCain is another. Is a processor or a producer, manufacturer, and the dynamic is being deployed very positively because on the 15th of February 2018 there was already more than 30 companies that had committed with some big companies and smaller companies representing a number of brands, showing their determination. They've committed, and so they put in a Nutri Score. Now, it's something which is real. If you go to supermarkets, you find it's still quite low because you've got the renewal time of packaging and you've got to get rid of the old stock. But there's already products from Fleury Michon and Ranu which are labeled with the Nutri Score, and in e-commerce, the mass retailers to put in their drive-throughs. It's much easier to do it than the packaging. It takes less time. So Auchan, Intermarché, and Leclerc have done the same thing with the possibility of reading the Nutri Score on products in their drive-throughs. And you've got to hear on the packaging of firms that have started to the transformation. It's going to take a certain amount of time, but it's going to increase throughout 2018. Communication will go along with the deployment of the Nutri Score. It'll be set in place fairly quickly. There's a video which was created, and there are these flyers. They're going to be customized by the retailers or the producers and then handed out in shops or wherever, in whatever form the operators wish for. There's going to be a big media campaign, a big TV campaign in the press, launched by the National Association for Public Health, National Agency for Public Health, and a whole load of actions, a TV campaign as well, and as well in schools with health professionals, the social world, education, and so on and so forth. Now, for this, now there is a system which has been deployed to enable economic operators to get information for Public Health France. You can have access to a special site for the charter for the use of the Nutri Score. There's all the elements in there. And for a manufacturer, they've got a period of 2 years to label all the products of the branded mark, of the recorded brand. Now, everything's going well, except it's not completely one because a certain number of operators are trying to torpedo Nutri Score. 6 big companies, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Mars, Mondelez, Nestle, and Unilever, have said they're going to have their own competing label, even if it doesn't work as well, even if it's less efficient. These 6 companies are now only 5 because, fortunately, Mars has recognized the lack of credibility of this attempt to torpedo Nutri Score in Europe and has pulled out, and we hope that the other companies as well will do the same thing and leave room for the deployment of Nutri Score, which today is voluntary. We can't, of course, make it mandatory, but you might know that in 2018, the European Commission is going to give in a report analyzing the different systems set up by the various countries, and there will be the discussion of the universal aspect of a nutritional logo and its obligatory nature, mandatory nature in Europe and in France with the Ministry of Health, and they wish it to be taken to the European level. So Nutri Score is the public health model which could be the most used. So with this, the idea of the smoke screen that's being put up by others, there are 150 specialists, 40 knowledgeable societies of experts and associations. They have said that they want Nutri Score to be there, and any other efforts to go against the history of proposing other systems which weren't endorsed or which have been shown scientifically as being of lesser interest. So to conclude, I would say that today what's interesting is the approach of people thinking about committing to setting up the Nutri Score with the idea of having a lot of transparency for the consumer. It's a consumer right. It's a duty of the industrial operators. And through this commitment for transparency to want to help and to be part of the collective public health efforts. So very briefly, some ideas, some information. I think maybe we've got time for a couple of questions, very brief questions, before we hand over for the next presentation. I'll finish.
Bonjour.
Hello. Are there any categories which won't be in the Nutri Score? I'm thinking about alcohol or other categories like that. Yeah, not in the Nutri Score, so that it's consistent. All products which aren't in the ENCO, so they're not pre-labeled, artisanal products, ready meals, and specific ranges, baby food and alcohol. Alcohol, we're looking at to have a specific labeling on alcohol content and sugar content. It's not easy to do. No other questions? I was just wondering, the system, can it take into account additives? Because when you look at Coca Zero is a B, there's less sugar, but if it's replaced by aspartame, is it better? Yes, it's a very interesting question because, well done, but it doesn't cover all the dimensions of the food. There are things which aren't taken into account, additives, contaminants, pesticides, price, taste. There's no way of summarizing all of these dimensions into one single logo. So the Nutri Score is just the nutritional quality. This doesn't mean that you can't have other types of information on other types of other elements, but for additives, the problem isn't so much informing the consumer as knowing whether additives are good or bad for the, if it's not good for health, they should be banned. But you need to know as well the limits of the Nutri Score, which don't make it possible to take in all elements, but just the nutritional value. It's a start, but it doesn't cover everything. Other questions? Two questions. The first was the same as the lady, and the other one was in terms of communication that's going to be done. Is it going to be said that you can maybe have a bit of orange, a bit of red, and not just green? Because otherwise it's going to be a lack nutritionally. Yes, of course. The whole idea of the communication is to give the rules of the game. And it's not a question of saying, only eat green, don't eat red. It's just to say that when you read, you're entirely allowed to it, but sometimes you should eat it more occasionally in smaller quantities, but explaining that you can eat all these products. If there's a better positioned alternative, you can think about whether you want to take it or not. If you're very close to a brand, if you like a particular brand, stay with it, but maybe eat it in smaller quantities and less regularly. So it's the whole challenge of the communication we have to do. So, if there's no other questions, thank you very much, and we'll hand over now to the next presentation.